tell me about 2019 and your thoughts after such a gorgeous 2018, making such harmonious and beautiful wines. How is 19 different?
Well, this is like gets into the range of like teasing things apart. It's they're like, as the two vintages are like somewhat like, they're not twins, but they're like, to me, they're like fraternal twins, because they had so many similarities, but there are differences. But it's like two great vintages back to back, not drought years, very, generous rainfall, it's almost, hard to remember, what it was like. But like I say, these are wines where you have to really only, like, people like us would be trying to tease them apart, because most people would just say, wow, these are great wines. And, the 18s are great, the 19s are great. And so, when we talk about the differences, it's actually a little bit hard to describe, because the 18s were just, very forward, big, structural wines, and were just heralded as this great vintage, and it is. And then the 19 came along, and, I personally, my opinion is that I've always been, it's like, do you like John Lennon or Paul McCartney kind of thing? And I'm like, well, I've always been a little bit of a fan of this 19 vintage, because of this real focus that it has. And there's just a depth and concentration and center of gravity, but not on a big scale of tannins. That it's like this really refined tannins. And so to say one's better than the other, I just feel like there's this harmony in the 19s. And I've always been this kind of secret admirer of the 19s. And I had to listen to people say, well, it's the 18 vintage is the great vintage. And I'm just like, okay, never mind me. I just kind of like the 19s, because they kind of speak to me in terms of balance and finesse, but real depth. And so I think it could, you ask different people, you'll get different answers, but yeah, I think they're spectacular. And there's just something about the 19s that I've really gravitated towards.
The 19 vintage. How was 2019 different than 18? It wasn't as, the harvest wasn't as late. There were some heat spikes. What were the main differences?
The differences are they like I say, they are the fraternal twins. I think 18 probably, the biggest difference was that 18 was just a bumper crop. It was probably crop size. If you weren't really on top of it and did the proper thinning, that crop could get out of hand, and it did in many cases. And vines, when they're it's coming after record rainfall in 17, so the vines were really pumped. Right. And the strange thing is that you see these years, like 2005 was one of them, and then 2018, when you thin the vines don't really care what you've done. They have the ability to produce X amount of fruit, and the clusters you leave behind just get bigger. The berries get bigger, the clusters get longer. And so I think it was an issue with controlling maybe some vigor and some crop size in 18 that we did not have in 19, even though it was a big rainfall year. But the vines were just sort of pumped up in 18, and they were determined to produce this record crop. And I think that was one of the last years where Dave takes flack for everything. If it's wet, it's hard. If it's dry, it's hard. But people were giving him a hard time about how much he was thinning. And Mrs. Chappellet Molly would stop and say, well, why is all this fruit on the ground? And Cyril would drive by, and everybody would see all this fruit on the ground. He would finally said, would people stop looking at the ground and start looking at the vine? Don't see how much fruit is on the ground. Look at how much fruit is on the vine. And which was his way of saying, leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. And he really had to thin a lot. And that was the people that didn't get the quality. Whereas I think 19, it was, that great year where everything's just kind of handed to you. You don't have, you don't have the issues of the big crop. You don't have the issues of the bigger, you don't have weather issues. And then the wines, kind of make themselves, they come to you with this potential that once you key into the vintage, you learn quickly how to handle the grapes from that vintage. And was kind of obvious to us with 19.
So are you saying 19 was even easier than 18 because you didn't have to worry about crop levels, like too much crop?
I think viticulturally 18 had its challenges.
Yeah.
It's like a 19, like in Bordeaux, 1982, or in California, 1997, where you have massive crop of high quality. And that 18 was one of those vintages. But it's kind of a freight train because, like I say, you thin the vine, it will come and produce more fruit.
I heard the same thing. I remember that's exactly what Paul Hobbs told me, that he would crop and it just kept on coming back. They had to go like 3 times in and cut crop, but also in a way, and some people didn't, they had very large crop, but sometimes it makes fantastic wines, like you said, 97 or in Napa, or 82 in Bordeaux, or 90 was the same in Bordeaux. So that's sort of interesting. But the one thing that we'll taste your wines in a minute. I haven't tasted them yet, but I did find though that stylistically the wines are different. That 19 has slightly riper fruit, let's say more typical, if you will, Napa, but not overripe, but you get a little bit sweeter fruit to it. Did you find that, like, stylistically?
Well, yeah, I would say maybe not as much ripe, but there's just kind of like a saturation to the fruit.
Yeah.
And that could be ripeness, but it's like this really finessey kind of saturation where there's, it's looking at the color, the cohesiveness of the aromas and flavors, the tannins that seem just like big but very knit together. And I could see ripeness, but it's almost just like a power. But to me, it's the way the wines come together, and did early on. That's why I was like, wow, I really like these 19s when they were very young. And relatively, in the end, they're about the same tannin levels, but there's something I really enjoy about the tannins and the fine grain sort of nature mouth coating tannins of the 19 that, like I say, it's like Eskimos talking about snow here, but there is something that's just different. I mean, it's hard to describe, but we all do this stuff all the time and talk about wine. But yeah, there are differences, and it's somebody's going to prefer 18 and somebody else is going to prefer 19. So I think that's maybe in the end.
It's a nice problem to have. So, which wine do you want to start off with?
I would start with the Cabernet Franc. That's the way.
Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I usually start with the Franc.
Okay.
Just because then once you get into the Cabernets, it's kind of like a whole different range of flavors. But so you've had our Franc many times, and it's kind of it's evolved into a kind of a certain style, and I would say with the 18 and the 19, these two I think are very, very similar to each other. The Francs, they both have that same sort of nice kind of complexity of the Franc, but as you can see, our blends are, we're never trying to make 100% Cabernet Franc. We're always looking at it as I always think of it as a Bordeaux wine that's got Cabernet Franc as its base, and then why not take advantage of all the other blenders that add to make a greater, more complex wine, in both in aromas, flavors, and structure by blending.
It's the Cabernet Franc really has this purity to it, and it's very primary. It's like you just took a bunch of grapes and just ate them. It's really transparent, beautiful wine. very fine tannins, like you say. And I love how it's so drinkable now.
Speaking of the youngsters that, we're mentoring, whenever we're sitting down blending, I really insist on, if I ever insist on anything, is that never lose the finesse of the Cabernet Franc grape, because got the most wonderful tannins, and I don't even know what they are, because that's something that goes beyond book knowledge. Like, what makes Cabernet Franc texture what it is just Cabernet Franc. And and so it's very important when we blend this wine that we never lose sight of that finesse that Cabernet Franc has. And if we ever if we ever lose that, I think we've kind of gone in the wrong direction. So it's very much, that's a big part of when we sit down to blend this, is to never go like, oh, that's a really big, that's a monster Cabernet Franc. If somebody says that, I go like, whoa, we got to go back the other way. Yeah, something went wrong. And so that finesse is kind of hardwired, but with these powerful wines that we have at our disposal, you could lose that in the blending process.
Yeah, totally.
We look for those Cabernet lots or other blending varietals that are on like a parallel with it, and not sort of blend too much out of it, the field that it's in. Like, choose lots that can add flavor and texture, but not like change the structure of the wine, so that you're blending kind of across like a similar palate range, but adding more, kind of flavor and aromas to the wine.
Beautiful. So now we'll go to the Napa then, right? Cab?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Signature Cab.
Is that pure? I can't remember. Is that pure Cabernet, or is there also what else is in it? Okay.
That's blended. So and it's funny because it's almost like now that I look at it, it's almost like a flip version of the Cab Franc, whereas the Cab Franc is 78% Franc, the signature Cabernet is 77% Cabernet Sauvignon, and then it's blended with Petit Verdot, Malbec, and Merlot. Sometimes Franc, not always. The Franc doesn't always. We don't have enough Franc very often, but it doesn't always help the blend. So it's this is it's kind of like the flip side of the Franc, where you take the strengths of the Cabernet and you just kind of fine tune it with some of these other blending varieties. But I can say, this is, we've tasted together many signature Cabernets over the years, but this is where I go like, this is a powerful concentrated wine, and I think it just carries that, what we keep talking about in the 2019 vintage. It's almost like embodies it.
For me, this wine, it seems, I think it's fantastic. One of the best I've had of this wine, because it has much more finesse. It's dialed back a bit, and I don't know if that's the vintage, or you're actually tweaked things a little bit, but the quality of the tannins, the fruit, everything, it's just so harmonious. Like you were talking about earlier about the 19. What a gorgeous wine.
Yeah, I think the way the oak comes in too, there's like kind of layer of just beautiful sweetness from the oak that
wonderful.
Oak can be abused, but it's such a, the wine wouldn't be the wine without that oak. And I think it displays the spice and the toast of the oak, the way that it connects with that dark fruit and the kind of the spice.
What is that sell for now in the States?
That'll be about $90.
Okay.
So
gorgeous.
This is going to be a challenge for me. This is the first time I've tried this finished. I haven't tried this finished for before it was finished. Before it was bottled, I tried it, but one of my challenges is going to be having enough of this wine, because this wine is a wine that I think restaurants and collectors who are just ready to drink will just drink this, because it's so balanced. It's just so kind of lovely. I just find that this is one of those wines that people go, oh, That's why we drink these wines. And
yeah, what a wine.
I feel like it's
really like that.
A wine that's just, it's almost like got this horsepower under the hood, but it's just kind of purring. You know,
Totally.
There's a gentility, but,
right
you sense the horsepower that's behind it.
Philip,
I just get, it's very complex. Complex, yeah. Listen,
like
so
that.
now we go to Mountain Estate, the Hideaway, right?
Yep.
And then this is the single vineyard that I always say it's right behind Cyril's house, but nobody knows where Cyril's house is, so it doesn't make sense to people when I say that. But it is right behind Cyril's house. It's a 15-acre block that is between Continuum and Colgan.
Okay.
So it's so very different from the property around the winery. So up and over the hill, more of a southwest facing slope, and thin, very red volcanic soil, and much more just kind of shallow soils over there. Perfect, ideal Cabernet site. We've never even thought of planting anything there besides Cabernet, because you just look at the ground and you're like, well, this is made for Cabernet.
Where is it from David Arthur then?
So right next to David Arthur is, David Arthur's stuff is right across this little, on the side of Colgan, right? So now David Arthur pulling from that part of the vineyard. So we back up to Colgan's rock pile that they've been crushing. Now they have LVMH's money. They can turn rocks into vineyard very amazingly just by crushing enough of it. But one of the interesting things about this is that about a month ago, we started drilling a well because they had a very successful well on their side. So we started drilling a well. So we know that 870 or 80, maybe almost 90 feet below the surface is nothing but solid volcanic material, and that is what this is sitting on. And the well that we drilled was on the edge of this vineyard right here, and watching the tailings coming out of the well, watching the little sample pieces that they would every 20 feet they'd get a little strainer full of the material that was coming out. This is absolutely black crushed volcanics that is underneath. So the soil that is above that is a fairly thin soil part that the vines are living in, because they can't live in solid volcanic material as much as we might hope that they could, but they can't live in it. So it's interesting that it has, as Philip said, very red soil on the top, but go down 6 or 7 feet and start drilling that well. It was just the blackest, most hard material that you could imagine going through. And we actually found a very good quality well in that surface, which is fascinating.
And I like the way it's definitely texturally different than the signature, where it has slightly plusher tannins, but they're still very fine, but very different compared to the signature, and a gorgeous wine again, I must say.
But I think that,
and it's 100% Cabernet and from one vineyard, and so that's a challenge, to say, where the signature we can pull from all directions, different varieties, but when you stick, this is not something we are known for, is making a single vineyard, and certainly not since the early 70s have we made 100% Cabernet. So this has been a little bit of a learning experience, but we sort of built into the vineyard the complexity to use in the blend by in the 15 acres, it's 6 different blocks, and they're different clones and different rootstocks. So it's all Cabernet, but they're all fermented separately, and they don't all go in every vintage, so it's only what we think are the best. And so it is a kind of a monolithic wine. I don't think it necessarily has to be the most complex, because you're not working with a lot of diversity, but it's just to kind of try to take what's good about this place and display it in the in the bottle.
Yeah. Well, I really find it exciting and very unique. So I think it really transmits well, that particular soil exposition and the whole thing. So let's go to the Pritchard Hill then. This should be fun to try right after that.
Yeah, well, great comparison.
The nose is amazing. I mean, on this, that nose just jumps out at me.
So still almost 100% Cabernet, 5% Petit Verdot, but and you can say it's a single vineyard if you look at the whole property, but the whole property is over 100 acres of vines, and you can choose from the hideaway, you can choose down by the winery, you can choose in front of Molly's house, above Molly's house, on the side of Molly's house, or anywhere else, and so it's really it's a selection from the best blocks, and then gets down to that kind of granular level of the best barrels. If we're not going to use an entire block, we take, whatever is the best from our favorite coopeраges or whatever. So it's kind of we spend a lot of time on the details of this wine, and for me, that what I see in this, and this is just my opinion, is that what comes across is a different texture. When you've selected this, it's both that kind of power and finesse, and the texture is a big part of this wine. That it's just taken this fine quality of tannin and then the aromas and flavors and put them together. And I think that maybe for me distinguishes it from the hideaway or the signature.
Yeah, it's a little bit plusher, but I like how it finishes with just a nice sort of dryness or austerity in the end, and it's fresh too. Like you finish it, and then it just makes you want to taste it more. And you almost could drink it now. I think it'll be better in 2 or 3 years. But the plushness and freshness is a really nice thing on it. It's not overly fruit forward or anything. And it's so interesting, like you said, and now I understand why you said no. It's not really more fruity than the 18, but it's how everything's working together, like almost slightly better integrated. Like I like what I'm saying is I like your 19 slightly more than your 18s from what I tasted last year.
Well, it's interesting because I think that this wine won't go out for another year, which I'm happy about that. But I think those people who are smart enough to hang on to some of it, and since I was just with some of these people who are telling me about their 6 vintages of Pritchard Hill Cabernet, they've never opened a bottle of it, and it's like, oh my God, really? And it's like, and I'm saying, but why are you here at this dinner? Oh, because, and I'm thinking they're paying $400 to come to this dinner, and we're opening a couple older vintages, some that they may have and some they may not have, but they have 6 or 7 vintages. And I'm saying, in one sense, that's a great source of brilliance and a tremendous, tremendous amount of them feeling confident of the wines that we're making, so that those wines will become, and nobody's buying our wines. Maybe somebody is, but I don't think people are buying our wines to trade them. There's not like Harlan's and the Screaming Eagles and the First Growth Bordeaux's. Most of these people are buying them to drink them eventually. They're going to drink them. They're not going to put them back in the market. And I think that this is one of those wines that anybody who has 3/4 of whatever their allocation is left over in 10 years from now, they're going to be so happy, because I'm just tasting it. It's really gorgeous and fairly well refined right now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And so anyway, Philip, way to go on this one. Your team and you killed it.
That's really something.
I'm quite happy for the role that Mother Nature played in this wine too.
Wow.
It's yeah. The nose is the nose. It's hard, you know, because these wines are, you know, it's all this family resemblance. So it's not like we're saying, well, we've got one, you know, it's like a Pinot Noir producer. We've got one from Russian River and one from Santa Lucia Highlands and one from Oregon, where you see these big differences. But this is this kind of tight knit family of wines, and they differentiate themselves, and you know, as quality rises, they differentiate themselves in smaller ways, you know, their personalities. But I think that the each one is, you know, definitely has its personality, but that just the aromas and flavors on the Pritchard Hill are, to me, quite amazing.
I agree. And I would love to, well, next time we're together, let's try the 19 against the 14, because that was one of my favorites of recent vintages. I'm curious, but really something else, this 19. Well, listen, I better head off. So, but let's plan on doing that and catch up and taste a few vintages. But I really thought, and I have to say, when Philip told me, when I heard that he liked 19 better, I'm just like, oh yeah, hold on. But I have to say, after the tasting, I'm like, whoa, these really are like a notch up. And so that was really an exciting tasting. I'm looking forward to tasting more 19s. Like, you know, these are really gorgeous. But I also think that you've tweaked a few things. I think you alluded to that earlier in the conversation. And I think I remember a few years back, oh no, sometimes the wines are like a little bit overdone. And I really like, you know, these are really just so, you know, really Chappellet. And also maybe even they harken back to some of the, you know, older vintages of your dad and stuff, but they're gorgeous wines. It was a great tasting. Okay, guys, I better head out. So thanks again.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Have a good evening. Okay.
Right.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye.